I'm Michael Bain, and this is the Best Defense Survival Roundtable, where every week we bring together Mike Seeklander, Michael Janich, Rob Pincus, and Dr. William April to discuss the ongoing COVID-19 emergency. And I think this week we have other things that have to be discussed here because the situation in the country is, I think, dangerous. I think we have passed a situation where I don't want to see another commercial that tells me we're all in this together, because I'm pretty sure we're not all in this together. I'm pretty sure that I don't know what the hell is going on in this country. Dr. April, you mentioned coming in that you're not a happy puppy.
Well, I think it's past the point where having a problem with the government approach to the COVID situation makes you a crank. Some numbers came out this week on a medical aggregate site called Medscape. 3 very serious physicians sat down and did the math. And it turns out that the reasonable expectation is that unemployment numbers that we're getting now, which are edging into the territory of, Great Depression-sized numbers, are going to be responsible in the immediate term for 77,000 deaths of despair. And that means healthcare that gets deferred or are not undertaken, suicide, depression, all these sorts of things. So when we're talking about a price tag for the cure that is quite literally equal to the price tag of the disease, I don't think it makes us crazy to want to talk about whether this is a good thing to do.
And I've seen more and more that we're actually not allowed to do that. You see a crackdown in social media on quote unquote fake news. Mr. Pincus, you are in New York City. You are going to teach a class tomorrow. You're going to do so safely, but you're going to do so in violation of the stay-at-home rules. Some thoughts?
Well, I've been talking, on this program and a lot on social media and other interviews about this idea of responsible rebellion. And I've also been very quick to say, no, I didn't need to shut my business down. I could be teaching down in Florida, but I have felt like it was not the responsible thing to do in March, certainly to try to continue my tour as planned. It never would have worked. It wouldn't have worked financially. It wouldn't have worked morally, ethically. Students wouldn't have come out. People weren't going to host. But we are now 2 months plus into this situation, and we know a lot more about what's going on. And a lot of instructors have continued to teach at outdoor ranges. I haven't seen anything except private one-on-one stuff going on indoors, and I think that makes sense. Quite honestly, I've had to talk to, and the reason I'm here in New York City is some of the people that are participating in the event tomorrow, which is just going to be a few miles north of here. They're going to be participating with a lot of knowledge because they were on the front line here at ground zero, the epicenter of the pandemic as far as the U.S. is concerned. I mean, these are physicians that were in some of the hardest hit hospitals, the earliest hit, and the ones that are still dealing with the problem. These are people from government agencies that are involved in the medical response, the emergency management of that response in Albany and here in the city. They've been consulting with me, and they will be participating tomorrow. There's a couple of them happen to be former students. And what I want to do is not just rabble rouse. This isn't just a protest. It's not just a statement of responsible rebellion. Honestly, I think the range owner is being very brave. I expect he's going to get a strongly worded letter at the very least next week after it breaks that he opened his range. He dared to open his range up and host this event. There's going to be some local law enforcement who are participating. I hope that it doesn't go the way of Officer Anderson out in Seattle, who got fired after making a very bold public statement about the importance of moving forward. But what I also want to do, in addition to all that, all the political statement stuff, is really put together a set of videos and pictures and posts and articles or whatever, blog entries that are going to give other instructors a best practices kind of path forward. Not just Rob made some stuff up in a basement, but here's medical professionals, here's emergency management guys. We're going to be on a range that was, I think, refurbished about 4 or 5 years ago, so it's a relatively modern range, but it doesn't have any special equipment. How do you run a defensive shooting class responsibly in the coronavirus era? Because no matter whatever side of the politics you're on, there is a virus, there is a risk, It may not be as high as we feared it was going to be on March 1st. It may not be as low as some people are acting like it's just the flu, but somewhere in between is the truth. And yet we all need to move forward with that and with mitigating those risks in mind, but still running classes. So that's what we're trying to do tomorrow here.
Mr. Janich, if you recall a couple of weeks ago when Georgia said it was going to open, I believe the Washington Post said that Kemp, the governor of Georgia, would have blood on his hands. And the same for the governor of Florida, which Florida never really closed. And yet what we're seeing as Florida and Georgia reopen is we're not, once again, we are not seeing the predicted apocalypse. How many more times does the apocalypse have to not show up before the people who are leading us, allegedly our political leaders, sit down and say, maybe these models aren't what they were cracked up to be? Mike?
I agree. I think one of the things that is probably the most underrated resources that we have going for us is just the ability of people to behave with some common sense. We don't get enough credit as far as what our capabilities are. And if we took the resources, we took the capabilities that we have as individuals, and we simply guided those with some decent leadership, I think we'd be way ahead. Instead, what it comes down to is we have people who are trying to mandate and tell us, you need to do this, you need to do this. We need to think for you because we're smarter than you are. I think institutionally, we have all realized that's not the case. The more that you pay attention to what's being said by our leadership is too strong a word, I'll say management, the managers who are ostensibly in charge, the more that we see them stepping on their wangs over and over and over again, the more we realize, you know what, we're actually pretty capable. Just give us some good guidelines, give us some good information, and let us use common sense to do what's in the interest of the greater good.
Well, you see that now at this point, it's fair to say that Sweden worked. Essentially, Sweden had X number of deaths, but rather than saying we're going to spread the deaths out like peanut butter over a whole loaf of bread, we're going to take the hit and we're going to have some level of herd immunity. My understanding is that Sweden is at 25% infected, which is herd immunity. That's very close to the percentage number at which you are likely to have the herd safe. Mr. Seeklander, Tulsa, Oklahoma, what is going on there?
Strangely enough, it almost looks like business as normal. Before I go into some of those details, though, it's interesting you say that about Sweden, because I think that proves the point that the media and what we read and where we read it and when we read it skews a bunch of stuff. For example, if you would have asked me that before you said that, I would have said, no, I think Sweden to an extent is a failure, because I saw two separate articles recently about one of their lead guys, talking about the fact that maybe they had made a mistake, and they had also put some of the older people in their old folks' homes at risk that they probably shouldn't have done. They would have done it differently. Some insecurities there were what I read in the articles. So I think that everything we read has to be looked at with a wise eye or a wise ear. We need to think about everything we see and everything we hear. And of course, that's not COVID-19, that's life today with the internet. But realistically, Mike, right now, honestly, Tulsa and the Owasso, Oklahoma area look darn near normal. I mean, my clinch MMA facility is open back up, although I'm personally not going back to classes. Traffic is up. People are all over the place. Mexican restaurant is open. They've spaced out tables. There's still a bunch of restaurants, I think, that have truly overcome this thing. They figured it out, like McDonald's. I've been at McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, and the last few times, there's been no human contact except for the person with the gloves that holds the basket up that I grabbed the food out of. So they've solved some of these problems, which is interesting, because I agree with what Mr. Janich just said, is that, hey, it's time to give people the responsibility to figure some of this stuff out on their own, as well as to take the risks that they need to take on their own. But then again, you look at places like California, where 3 or 4, because I follow a lot of jiu-jitsu places, these guys are getting arrested. They're getting cited and they're getting arrested for opening up their schools and their gyms. That's bad news there. That's not good, in my opinion.
Well, we're here in Colorado. We are being whipped back and forth. As recently as last week, as I mentioned last week, the governor of the state said, well, we may have to be closed down till 2022. He went to Washington, sat down with Trump, came back and said, well, no harm, no foul. Maybe we should open this state up. It almost seems to me, at least in Colorado, and it is they're trying to see what they can get away with. How much can we, they put the ridiculous mask rules went into effect after the center part of the pandemic, after the situation had gotten better. And now they're saying, well, maybe we could just do away with the mask rules on Friday because it's like, guys, I find it hugely frustrating. And to see a situation like in Michigan, where you've got a governor that says, because I say so and you can't stop me, or Newsom in California who says, hey, you know what? I'm going to close this beach to punish your ass because we don't like you. Dr. April, how does this end?
Well, it's interesting that there's been a change in the debate recently, and I think it's because more and more people are taking Mr. Janich's point, which is I need to find information, sober information, and process it for myself. Well, that isn't what one side of this debate wants. And so the level of hysteria in media is rising. I read an article today on the Daily Beast that said, that gave a list of states that are doomed to a second lockdown. So what they're saying is that opening is such a disaster, which it's not, that they're going to need a second lockdown. And they're sort of doing reverse cherry picking of data. It's not cherry picking; it's pit picking. They're scouring the country for negative outcomes, including finding cities that have single cases, so that when there's an increase from 2 to 3, they can say there's been a 50% increase in cases. There was a projection today that the author said that if the worst case scenario happens, there'll be 5 million infections in Georgia alone and 50,000 deaths in Georgia alone. So in other words, if you do this opening up, you're going to kill as many people in one state as have died in America so far to date. The level of hysteria required to get people to just accept and swallow the pill is really getting breathtaking.
And Rob, Mr. Pincus, I also see in some ways that the hysteria is becoming increasingly dangerous. I mean, you're seeing fights over people wearing, not wearing masks. You're seeing violent encounters of people who feel that another person has come within 6 feet of them, which I think it's fair to say right now we all understand that 6 feet away is a purely arbitrary number. There is not a whit of science behind it. The only science number that I've seen that has any science behind it is 13 feet. But people aren't going to stay 13 feet apart, so what the hell? Let's go with 6. Rob, we're heating up the solution here. The Bunsen burner is boiling, stuff right now.
Yeah, the patchwork, the inconsistency, it causes frustration. I think both. I don't think either side of the political debate wants anybody to think for themselves. I think they both want a narrative to follow. I think, or to be followed. I think that there are also a lot of people who want, and we've talked about it before. I think there's a lot of people who want their leadership, or they want somebody else to blame. They want to say, this person told me to do this, or I'm not doing this thing until this other person says I can. And they're using that as their rationale or their motivation. And I do have a high degree of trust and faith in humanity in the long run, but in the short term, a lot of people do like to avoid accountability and responsibility for their actions. So it's much easier to push it off on somebody else. Well, when this somebody else is giving you information that changes every week without a good explanation, if the somebody else is countered by somebody else who's just as equal in terms of their knowledge or their value or their respect or their influence over you, you start to get frustrated and you start to get angry. And if you end up putting on blinders and just picking one side dogmatically, well, then you go outside in the public space and you see somebody who isn't agreeing with the way you think it should be, whether that's mask, no mask, 6 feet, 13 feet, 12 feet, open, closed, whatever, you get angry. Now you've got a target for your anger. You get to say to that person, hey, you're wrong. I mean, we saw the shooting, what is it, a Dollar General store or something? The woman was told she had to wear a mask. She went home. The husband came back. They got into a fight with the security officer and somebody got shot over it. And that's not even the law enforcement aspect. That's not even the civil disobedience aspect. That's not a riot or a rebellion. That's just human beings succumbing to the frustration that's being caused. And I will tell you, you know, I've been all over the country. I've spent a lot of time in Florida, a lot of time in Colorado, a lot of time in other places now at this point. Colorado has been the most confusing and the most illogical to keep up with. And it's also, on a county by county basis, the most diverse. We still have counties out west that are locked down on basically a locals only policy, while we have counties in the suburbs of Denver that are wide open saying, hey, we're cool, let's move forward responsibly. And then you've got the metropolitan area of Denver that you've got people still trying to maintain control. And honestly, I used to think that the governor was doing a pretty good job of managing it kind of in the middle ground. I don't think he's leading at all, and that's the problem. You've got these lower levels of government that are now fighting for their control.
Well, I think it's in Colorado and in other states, you see a governor who's looking toward his political future.
You know,
he's
Mr.
trying to call the shot.
Mr.
Dr.
Bain,
April?
not to jump in on Rob's
No,
point.
please.
What we've got isn't what we should get, you know, which is there may be two sides in a political debate, and that's true. But one of those sides has an asymmetrical access to media. There's no question that the public media in the United States is dominated by one particular side in this debate, and they're able to access a level of hysteria. When I say hysteria, I don't mean in the public, I mean in the media, that is downright dangerous to the public. And that's really a one-sided assault on the public, because only one side of this debate has privileged access to the media.
Well, let me say that I've been amazed in the last 12, 14 hours here in New York. I have a lot of friends here. I've been in touch with a lot of people that knew I was coming here. And it was overwhelmingly the people that run in those circles, the people that are talking to the people and hanging out at the dinner parties and going to the museum openings and the galas with the people that are running the media in this city, thought I was crazy to come here, made me think I was walking into a third world country and that it was going to be just a big mistake to do it. It was a little bit hard to find a hotel, but let me tell you, I couldn't find a parking space. There was traffic at the Lincoln Tunnel. Midtown is busy, real busy. Downtown, it's kind of like a Sunday down in the financial district, like all the offices are closed so nobody's around. But this town isn't nearly as decimated or closed or dead or scary or whatever it's supposed to be as, honestly, I hate to use the word, I wouldn't normally use it, but as some of the elites in this country think it is. Business is happening right here in Midtown.
You know, one of the things that was saddest I saw was that in New York City, the Gym Salon closed its doors permanently. They make the finest egg cream in New York City. First egg cream I ever had in my life. That's losing Cuomo and the government of New York, or de Blasio, is no loss, but a good egg cream is hard to find. Mr. Seeklander, are you hearing more from your law enforcement contacts on as a situation here? I mean, essentially what's happening right now is the country is opening one way or the other. It either gets let open or it is going to open itself. And I think in the next 2 weeks, you're going to see what started a trickle, a little bit finger in the dike, a little bit, you know, a hairdresser in Texas, a hair cutter here, a restaurant owner in Castle Rock. But the dike is going to break. Is law enforcement ready for that, Mr. Seeklander?
I don't know. First of all, I don't know what an egg cream is. I'm going to throw that out there. You can tell me about an egg cream in a second. But actually, law enforcement, like, for example, I know I have a buddy with Tulsa PD. Their academy is back up and running. Another buddy with Oklahoma State Highway Patrol, their academy is back up and running. Now, interesting, these academies and some of these entities, I think, are doing a lot of the same thing that a lot of people in communities are doing, or maybe, I think actually maybe government entities are doing. They're making decisions that we're going to open up or we're going to move forward, but they're trying to put like some sort of stopgap. So, for example, one of the agencies is not doing any defensive tactics because that would give the students exposure. But here, and my take on that is, it's all or nothing. Okay, so if that's mission critical, we need individuals to man the streets, granted, great, start the academy, but start the academy and accept that the fact that someone's going to touch a doorknob or wash their hands in a sink or do something and flush a toilet, and if there's someone that has the COVID, they're going to transmit it. That's the bottom line. And I hate to say it, I think that's what we see government entities trying to put all these stopgaps in place, and the reality is, number one, we're finding out that they don't necessarily have the rights to control what they say they can control. assuming that it's not mass chaos in the streets, in which case, guess what? They wouldn't do jack shit for us anyways. They wouldn't be there. We would once again be on our own defending ourselves. Kind of like the unemployment checks. No way. I'm not worried about that one. I'm not going to worry about them to defend my home or defend my street or defend my subdivision. So I think once again we're seeing the lack of leadership in government across the board. But law enforcement right now, they kind of feel like they're back to normal here at least. Now we may be insulated because this is conservative Oklahoma, but.
Just as you know, Seeklander, just so you know, an egg cream has neither egg nor cream. It is milk, a flavored syrup like chocolate, and soda water, or a seltzer water, and it's the best drink in the world, and you can only get it in New York. So, in any case, one thing I noticed interesting, Mike, Mr. Janich, is that we talk back and forth here on masks. We've been doing that kind of on a regular basis. this mask, that mask, wear it, don't wear it. I read an interesting, scientific study today talking about, say, N95 respirators, any mask that was effective, an actual mask that was effective. And one of the side effects there that was noted is that if you have any kind of lung problems at all and you're exercising, you're doing something special, the mask itself is going to actually limit the amount of oxygen you can take into your body. They can track the drop in oxygenation of your blood during the period of time you're wearing an N95 respirator, which I find amazing as I watch people, I watch people on the road in front of my house down the hill on bicycles, sprinting, wearing N95 respirators. Ground is going to be very hard if they're not careful. Mr. Janich?
Yeah, the whole mask thing, again, trying to figure out in my opinion, if you read between the lines as far as the way this entire thing has worked, what we realized early on was that there was a shortage of medical grade masks that were really needed and should be prioritized for the medical community. And when we think about kind of the way that things evolved, the focus was we can't overwhelm the medical system. So what ended up happening was it's like, okay, we don't want people to wear masks, or at least the recommendation was that we don't wear masks. And I think that was during a time where we were trying to prioritize them for medical use because they didn't want everybody else hoarding masks the way we were saying hoarding toilet paper and everything else. What they really probably realized all along was that the mask, as far as spreading germs to somebody else, certainly does have some degree of effectiveness. If you have a true mask like an N95 and it's fitted properly, it also can protect you. The bottom line was they were prioritizing all that stuff for the medical community. They didn't want to say, hey, screw you guys, you can all die because you don't deserve to have a mask at that time. Once that situation stabilized, now we have a thing where it's like, oh yeah, we want everyone to wear masks if at all possible because, well, it can't hurt. But yeah, what you just said is exactly true. One of the things that I've been working on for the past couple of weeks, my full-time job is with Spyderco. We recently went through all the details and everything as far as reopening a business in Colorado to walk-in traffic. And in the process, we had to take a look at our facility and say, okay, how do we make this facility safe as possible, both for our employees and also for people who want to come in and take advantage of the business and actually give us business. So you look at the facility itself. One of the things we looked at is we want to encourage people to wear masks, but we also looked at it from a medical standpoint. And we said, look, if somebody has an existing respiratory problem, wearing a mask is not a good thing for them because they can't breathe. It limits the amount of oxygen they can take in. So wearing a mask, even it's kind of counterintuitive. You think if somebody has a respiratory problem, they should be wearing a mask to protect themselves from COVID-19. But the mere act of wearing the mask can also be something uncomfortable and potentially unhealthy for them simply because it restricts their breathing. So it's like anything else. There is no sweeping, okay, this set of rules is going to work for everything. It doesn't. You have to, again, think for yourself. Businesses have to think for themselves. They have to look at the nature of the business. They have to look at the nature of the resources in their facility and then figure out how to do what's smart that is going to further the greatest common good.
And that's hard. And that is hard.
It's not as hard as you think because people are doing it anyway. They would do it better if they were empowered with good information. where if you simply gave them conceptually, if you said, you know what, these are the basic things you need to bear in mind. You have a business that sells knives across a counter to somebody else. You know what? Make people stand at least 6 feet apart. When you're handing stuff back and forth, it's better to take that thing, put it into a tray, put the tray down, let the person pick it up. When you're done with it, sanitize it. Use these types of things to sanitize it. This will make sure that you kill whatever germs might be on there. And you give people those hard pieces of information to say, okay, if I take that and I apply it to my specific situation, I can do a lot of good, and I can run my business, and I can try to get back on track.
Well, one of the tenets that we had, just insert this in the best defense, the tenets was that our audience was smart. And if we gave our audience the tools, Dr. April?
Well, one of the things that I think was really missed in the beginning of the crisis was the failure to approach this with a public health perspective. And what I mean by that is public health works best through nudges. If we can nudge people to do this, and it's a little better, and we nudge them to do that, and it's a little better, it's like turning a battleship just a little bit at a time and produces big change. But instead, the ton of bricks model was used. And it's amazing that the public health model is finally catching up. My city, New Orleans, finally came out with a reasonable and effective infographic about mask wearing. They put up it side by side of two people in masks, and one of them was captioned, "My mask protects you." And the other one was captioned, "Your mask protects me. We're all in this together." That is an incredibly effective ad. Had it been run earlier, people would have had the opportunity to say, oh, wearing a mask helps us all. Now I get it. As opposed to put on a mask or you'll be arrested. So we've missed the boat. It's a public health problem. It needs public health mindset and intervention.
I think we've run up, though, against the rock of what is public health in the United States. And I say this, I'm sure he's a fine gentleman, but the public health person running Larimer County is the second son of a second son, a local boy who went to local schools, none of which have any ranking nationally in public health. And his previous job is going to elementary schools talking about sanitation. And suddenly you say to him, you have the power. You have the power. You can bring the fire. You will tell the people in this county what to do, and by God, we'll make it stick. And which is part of what Rob referred to as the crazed county by county confusion in Colorado. Rob, is there a solution to that? Is there, at this point, we have reached out to our political people and said, you need some leadership here. We don't need to get a new mandate every week on what we're doing. We need somebody to say, you know what, in about 4 weeks, everything is going to be open. We need you guys to help solve your problems. Let's work together to do that. Rob, that's not happening here. It's happening, I guess, in Florida and Georgia and Wyoming, of course, which doesn't count. I mean,
I don't
all
know
six
that
people.
it really is. I mean, even in Florida, DeSantis is getting a lot of credit for allowing more individual expression of responsibility, but there are still some odd little pieces of the puzzle that are being held back. The southern Florida beaches are now opening piecemeal. The southern Florida is now looking a lot like Southern California in terms of, well, this beach is open, but that one isn't. This one you can't sit on, that one you can. You have to wear a mask unless it's gotten kind of patchworky now as we start to reopen. And I think that you guys are going to be shocked by this. I'm not a big authority figure guy, right? Like I don't think it's a good idea to even condition human beings to be like, I need to be told what to do, especially when there's multiple different voices. I think we need to provide information, right? Education and empowerment. Seeklander's talked a lot over the last few weeks about the lack of leadership. I don't think that's going to miracle itself into, magically we're going to have leadership somewhere out here. I don't see it happening. Fauci could have been it. Maybe somebody else could have shown up on the national scene and said, I got this. Don't worry about the guy over here with the spray tan. Don't worry about these people over here trying to take your rights away. I'm the medical guy. I got this. And let me tell you what to do. And the nation might have listened, but that didn't happen. So at this point, it really does come down to everyone educating themselves. I've talked about this idea, like we do it in the gun community too, like states' rights seem to be close to individual rights. So we want to be fans of states' rights. except it's really just another layer of bureaucracy. It's really just another layer of confusion. So when we get down to the lowest unit, the American individual, the human individual that gets to make responsible choices, well, they need information. And then we get down to that next unit, which is the business and the coworkers and how is it, and everything that Janice just described is what every business in America needs to be doing. Not waiting for the CDC. It reminds me of after Sandy Hook. After Sandy Hook, every school wanted to talk to me about safety protocols, but as soon as we told them what we thought they should do, they said, well, we need to check with the county, or we need to check with the state, or we need to wait for the feds to tell us before we can implement anything. Well, that's what a lot of Americans and a lot of businesses and a lot of communities are doing, and they're not getting the answers. You've got to make the answers up. You know, on the masks thing, one of the big negative effects of telling everybody to save the masks for the medical professionals is that's still getting echoed all over the country. Well, I don't, you know, I would wear a mask, but those masks are important for the people on the front lines, the people in the, that's not true anymore. There are more mom and pop shops and businesses in America. I did not get 10 steps from the street vendors are here, the folding tailors selling their knockoff and their shoes. They're out there with their tables of stuff and the police are walking right by. So I don't know, these videos we're seeing of police throwing people to the ground in New York for not wearing masks. It's not happening here. And one of the tables was full of masks, designer masks, surgical masks, all the masks you could want. And for $10, I bought a package of 10 of them, not 10 steps from the parking garage on my way to the hotel. And I had my own masks, and they're probably better than these. But just to make the point, I picked up the package. I'll post a picture of the table full of stuff. There are plenty of masks out there for people to wear. There are plenty of face covers. You don't need to wrap a T-shirt over your face. You can get something that is at least designed to capture the droplets, even if you're just doing it for other people.
One thing I wanted to address a little bit here is answering people who you're killing my grandmother. If you go outside of my house, you kill my grandmother. I was thinking about that last night, and I realized that the arguments that are being presented to me are virtually the same arguments that anti-gun people present to me in quite literally the same terminology. That, well, it's common. Would it be so hard for you to give something up if it protected other people? And it's like, well, would it be so hard for you to give up your gun if we saved a child's life? You know, if we saved my grandmother, would it kill you to do something to save my grandmother's life? You know, the problem with those arguments is they can be applied in virtually every situation. It wouldn't kill you to drive 10 miles an hour for the rest of your life, and it would save, what, 35, 40,000 people a year, including 7,000 children. The problem with that argument is if you accept it for one thing, you're going to have to answer for it in each individual case. Thoughts on that, Mr. Janich?
Yeah, that's a tough one because it's a conceptual thing. It's something that, like you say, if you apply it to one thing, then it automatically applies to something else, and you rapidly get into this domino effect type of thing. And it also assumes that there is some type of direct cause and effect type of relationship. Well, if I do this, then it's going to benefit your grandmother. One of the things that we've been talking about here the entire time is that individual assessment, that individual responsibility, and that individual sensitivity to what your vulnerabilities are. So it's like, okay, if you go out without a mask, you're killing my grandmother. Well, no, that's not exactly true. What it means is that your grandmother is vulnerable. So if I really want to help, maybe I should buy your grandmother a mask or bring your grandmother some groceries, or do something that is a tangible benefit to keeping your grandmother safe rather than something that is symbolic, arbitrary, and not directly connected to your grandmother. What it comes down to is, again, everyone needs to figure out their own shit. To figure out, what do I need? What are my vulnerabilities? What are my resources? And how do I protect myself and the people that I care about? Obviously, if you have somebody who is being totally irresponsible, hey, I'm going to come up and blow my nose on your shirt, that's a totally different thing. But when you have something where somebody is simply trying to take this authoritarian mandate that we're getting from the government and saying, okay, well, now I'm going to enforce this on an individual level, and I'm going to be a pain in the ass to other individuals and try to be the thought police for them, that doesn't do anybody any good either.
But Mr. Seeklander, and we're now back. Mike, you brought us all the way back around to quality information. In the absence of information, an example: if two people are jogging along a trail in bright sunlight outside, fill in the blank, the likelihood of one catching not just COVID but any virus from that person in the passing of jogging is essentially on par with being struck by lightning while dancing nude in Times Square. It's plus or minus 0. However, taking that same person and sitting without mask in a parked car for 20 minutes, that you're going to get a much larger viral load. You're in a contained space. You're not getting refreshed with air. But again, that information is out there if you look for it. But you have to go look for it. It's not the media itself is not saying, "Hey guys, come on." This is let's look at this. In terms of this virus appears to take a certain level of viral load to infect you. Whether you get that load off a surface, or you get that load breathing. One of the reasons that I have read is that medical professionals have suffered disproportionately in this virus is constant exposure to a high load of the virus, which is their jobs, what they have to do. But Seeklander, what about information? I mean, what do we need to tell our viewers right now that they need to base their decisions on? Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense, and you already kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, I don't know if we can tell our viewers and listeners what to do in terms of information, and that's the problem. Yeah, I'll give you a great example. This is probably 4 weeks ago. We were in our maybe third or fourth roundtable. Matter of fact, we had just finished recording, and I left to talk to my wife, I walked out of the room, she was out there, and she just felt good all of a sudden, because in the past, she had been slightly worried. She didn't know she had some autoimmune things, and she wasn't feeling well. For whatever reason, this thing was worrying her a lot more than it was me. And she was super happy. She's like, "Yeah, I just saw this video, and it was this doctor, and this doctor was crying." And she's like, "But he wasn't crying because he was sad. He was crying because he realized that after weeks of working in the emergency room and doing this, that if you followed certain protocols, your chances of catching this thing was very, very low." And in terms of breathing on someone, certainly the numbers go up the closer you are. He said that in his mind, the way he said it on the video was like, "I would have to literally be laying on top of you, breathing in your face for you to have a significant risk." So if we have any distance whatsoever and we follow certain protocols, it's much less likely I'm going to catch it. But the point I'm trying to make is that made her day. That completely changed the evolution of the weeks after that in terms of her fear of this thing. Now, was that information correct? Was this doctor a subject matter expert? Did we vet his background? This could have been some quack on Facebook for all I know. I don't know. I have no clue. And that's the problem is it's like this. During an average day, how many Americans have the ability to track what our managers, let's not call them leaders, our managers in Washington, D.C., in Congress and the Senate are putting forth in terms of bills and legislation? Because you would literally have to spend your entire life tracking the baloney they're trying to put on certain bills and all of the side items and attachments and shit. I mean, and there's no objective website where you can go to. There's not a place you can go to and actually read the full truth. So I can't answer that question. I wish I could give you a good answer. Say, "Hey, folks, get on this website, and here's the best information that I would trust." Who knows? How many changes have we seen in 6 weeks now? 60 changes and going back and forth,
Dr. April, to add to that?
It's, the tolerance for fluidity is very tough to come by under stress. And yet we seem to be in a situation where the more we know, the less we can be sure of. And yet we're all looking for, sort of something to plant the flag on. I think we have to start with encouraging people to think about first principles. Mine is that, like a dog chasing a car, what would you do if you caught it? So, the goal is to survive this circumstance, still being a country that's recognizable as what it is. That the America that makes it through the back end of this process is one we want. And what I fear is that, it's such a cliche now, but there is an agenda out there never to let a good opportunity, a good crisis go to waste. And I think there's a certain, movement in our government that says this is our opportunity to make things worse if we can. Because some things that need to get broken will get broken, and then we can fix them in a way that looks more like we want them to look. It's frightening. It really is. And that's not conspiracy talk. It's an irresistible urge.
Well, I think it isn't conspiracy talk, because if you look at, there are political units in the United States, for example, that have literally sought for the last 50 years an internal passport, an ID that would be required for any citizen to carry and be produced on demand. And that's been essentially held off. I have very large and very angry birds in the other room, but that's been held off for years. But when that's phrased as a health passport, to be able to go into a restaurant or a hair salon, you have to produce a passport. You have to produce a document that says, I'm virus free. That's a case where a political agenda has been grafted on to the whole medical issue to it. And before we get deeper into kind of the political weeds, a friend of mine called me up today. We were talking this morning, and he is, I think all you guys know him. I mean, he is a skilled defensive person, a trainer in his own right, former law enforcement. And he said, you know what, I don't believe in masks at all. And he goes, but I'm wearing one every day. And he goes, I wanted to call you and tell you why, because I thought it might be something you could bring up to the team, is I have chosen to wear a mask because I don't want to risk escalating a bunch of morons to a violent situation. He goes, I don't give a damn about the mask. And I don't think it's a surgical mask. It's not a respirator. He goes, I'm not at risk. I'm in great, all those things. But he goes, I don't want to walk into a fill-in-the-blank Walmart and end up causing a fist fight that could escalate because somebody saw me without a mask. And he goes, so in my thinking, it's a question of non-escalation. Is that overstating, Dr. April? You're looking puzzled there a little.
Well, no, I think it's I don't mean to use the term disparagingly, but I think it's a matter of gamesmanship, that he's using that to establish rapport, to stop a potential negative escalation. But he's made a health judgment based on his own status, which makes sense to him. Our first principles are really important. I mean, mine as a health practitioner is that we always want the least restrictive, least disruptive solution to any health problem. I don't think that's too much to ask, and so that's what I tend to look for. But that's my metric. Everyone's going to have their own metric, and we're just going to have to rely on common sense in a way that we do when folks are in the jury box. Is it identical? 330 million exactly identical versions of common sense? Far from it. But in the main, we're surprisingly good at it. And when you put bunches of us together, we get even better at it. And so I think we need to not throw ourselves out the window and rely on what used to be called our right reason.
I want to, before we run out of time, I want to come back and address some of the criminal issues. As example, just where I live here this week in Colorado, every liberal organization in Colorado petitioned the governor to open the gates to the prison, turn them out, let them go. And one of the things we've talked about since the very beginning, since episode 1, was we got a whole lot of new people buying guns for exactly that reason. It's perfectly rational response. They let go bad people. Bad people are now back on the streets, as Dr. April has noted. Those people have to make a living. But we've got a lot, Rob, you've talked about training, both Seeklander, Janet, all of us have talked about reach out to us and we will help you through the gun stuff. I think we also need to start talking to the new gun owners about what I have in my head is the list of don't be stupid is not just the physical handling of the gun, but what we have learned over a period of decades as trainers and people who studied violent encounters. I'm beginning to think we need to be able to bullet points sound stupid, but we've got maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million new gun owners there who not only need to know how to unload, safely load, unload, not only know how to understand what the front sight is, but there's all these things we've learned, Dr. April.
If I could, I know this is going to sound strange, but one message I would give to the truly new to guns owner: resist the temptation to think of the gun as an exclamation point. It is the strangest mental structure in people. When they get a gun, for some reason, this seed is planted in their minds that a gun is something that I can use to make you take me seriously. That if I hold a gun like this, you will listen to me. That if I wave a gun around, you'll take me seriously. It's not an exclamation point. It's a remote control drill. It has one purpose and one purpose only. And the more we get away from that purpose, the more close we come to doing something really stupid that can't be fixed.
That is a great point. Rob, I know you have your own list of those kind of points, but going beyond safety, going beyond the actual physical handling of the gun, and going beyond training, what are those bullet points, the don't be stupid bullet points? You've got a couple of them. What are they?
It's, rights and responsibilities go together. It's one of my foundational principles. Dr. April was talking about, that to me is something that it applies to wearing the mask. It applies to, people might say whoever you're talking today was being a sheep. He was letting the crowd steer his behavior. But isn't that kind of what we do when we look to not be confrontational and we try to coexist and we try to, be part of the social contract that we have with our neighbors and with the rest of society so that we don't have to use the gun? That's part of your responsibility. So I think the number one responsibility that gun owners have is to not allow unauthorized access to their firearm. That is the bottom line, number one responsibility that all gun owners have. Do not allow unauthorized access. When we define unauthorized access, we're not just talking about a bloodthirsty killer. We're talking about mental deficiencies. We're talking about maturity. We're talking about emotional. We're also talking about unskilled. So if you're going to prevent unauthorized access, in other words, you wouldn't give the gun to somebody who wasn't educated and capable of, physically and mentally and intellectually capable of running it well and handling it well, then don't give it to yourself if you're not that either. Just because you own the gun doesn't mean you're even really ready to go out and use it. You're ready to carry it. So you're part of the unauthorized access group until you get training. We had a new guy. I say I haven't taught a class. I'm teaching my first class tomorrow, but we actually had a guy join our range down in Florida, and I was in the back room doing something. And there was only one other guy there out at the counter, sold him the membership. He said, I got a new gun. I've never shot it. I shot like 30 years ago. I guess I can figure it out. And I didn't even let the guy at the counter answer. I just said, look, I'll go out there with you. And I spent half an hour with the guy teaching him about his gun. But while I was there, I asked him about his safe. I asked him about storage. He had padlocks on his lockbox. He doesn't have kids at home. I talked to him about all these things. And I explained this idea to him. And I've explained it to a lot of new gun owners. I think it's really important to understand that you have to control access to the gun, even from yourself during those emotionally stressful times. Don't carry when you're drinking. Get educated about a new gun or a new holster or what you want to do with the gun, a competition or whatever it is. I think that's really, to me, the foundational base of that responsibility that goes with the right to keep and bear arms.
Mr. Janich, I think that's very good, Rob. You're absolutely right. Another point that I have seen with new shooters and training new shooters in the last couple of years where I got, again, I'm not a trainer. I've been an instructor a long time. I don't like it. It's not my calling. I'm under duress from my sweetie. I sometimes end up having to do it. But the whole issue of escalation, Mr. Janich, I mean, something we literally every episode of The Best Defense, we dealt with the concept of escalation. And I have found with new shooters, it's a harder concept to explain than one would think.
I think you're exactly right. Before I jump into that, I want to go back to just your comment about the trainer that called you and gave the reason for wearing his mask. I'd like all the folks listening out there, if you watch The Best Defense, if you looked at the methodology that we established clearly in that show, what that is avoidance. So people may look at it and say, that guy sold out, or he was intimidated. He ended up, just going along with everybody else and all this other kind of stuff. What that was a smart, conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm going to avoid a problem by simply doing something that allows me to fit in, not draw attention to myself, and then back to the point that you're making now, escalation. The idea that you're going to do something, first of all, life has no referees. When it comes down to most of what we do on a day-to-day basis, nobody is going to come in wearing a referee shirt and say, you know what, you had an argument with your wife and you were right. She was wrong. It doesn't happen. Okay, we don't get closure on most of the stuff that bugs us on a day-to-day basis. The best thing that we can do is to simply say, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm moving on. And the more that you give in to the idea of, I've got to be right, I've got to have my statement, I've got to be able to let people know what I think, the more you get fixated on that, the more likely you are to get sucked into a situation where things will escalate and get out of control. And it's especially true at a time like this, when everybody is on edge, everybody is volatile, everybody is frustrated. You look at all that stuff and you say, well, I'm really frustrated. Yeah, so is everybody else. Which again, when we look at things from a conceptual basis, I need to assess the threats that might be out there. Well, right now it's everybody, because everyone's freaking out.
Those are really, really good points. Mr. Seeklander, and just to expand on that also, but one thing that I feel like we need to touch on when we're dealing with this group of new people is, what's the line I think we used last week is, this ain't Tombstone and you ain't Wyatt Earp. Because you have a concealed carry license, because you are carrying a lethal weapon on your person, you have not been sworn, deputized, or brought into law enforcement. I know you've dealt with that in your classes.
Yeah, well, man, I could go on and on about this subject, but it was really well answered, I think, by the rest of the panel so far. So I'll give you another analogy. I'm working on my website recently, the last couple of weeks, and one of my buddies reminds me of this book that kind of guides website development. It's called Don't Make Me Think. And the point to it is, your website should be so easy and simple that when they get on there, the consumer doesn't have to think, oh, what do I do? What do I do? And they click the button. They do what you want them to do very easily without thinking. Well, guess what? Here's the deal. If you're a new gun owner, or maybe you know a new gun owner that needs to hear this, you don't get that option of don't make me think. You don't get the lazy internet age answer. You don't get that option. You just bought a tool that's ultra serious. Rob Pincus talked about securing it. Dr. April talked about that exclamation point. It's not an exclamation point. It's, like I said, a remote controlled drill. You don't get the don't make me think. You need to educate yourself. Books, my book. Pincus actually wrote the introduction to this book, by the way. It's free on my website. You can go to my website and download it. We'll put a link. But guess what? It doesn't have 3 pictures in it, and it's not a 30-second read. So if you're going to say, I'm going to buy a firearm, then you've automatically accepted the responsibility. And it drives me insane that you could almost compare a lot of new gun owners to someone. Let's do a parallel. New gun owner that buys a gun to get the exclamation point, but never does anything with it. That will be like buying a car, and then a year later me saying, hey man, how do you like your new Ford truck? Well, I never really put gas in it. Matter of fact, I'm not really sure how to put gas in that thing. Well, you never put gas in it? No. Have you ever started? No, I've never started, man, but I've got it. I've got it in the parking lot just in case I want to go somewhere someday. Wait, but if you don't know how to put gas in it, don't know how to start it, how are you going to go someplace with it someday? And do you know the legal ramifications of this Ford truck you bought? I mean, it's literally the same. Maybe the Ford truck is a little more expensive, but it's that stupid. So did I call people stupid? Yes. If they bought the car and never put gas in it, yes. If you bought the gun and never actually read anything about it and never learned how to load it and never got any training with it or sought out free training, because the internet is literally filled with free and some pretty good training, that's stupid. Take responsibility. You don't get the lazy way out on this one. Not if you want to own a gun. And if you don't, sell the gun and buy a better security system for your home, right? Buy pepper spray, get a dog, whatever.
Very, very good points. I would also like to mention that I believe still you can get all the Best Defense or many of our Best Defense episodes and Best Defense Survival episodes on My Outdoor TV right now, which of course is the pay site for OSG, Outdoor Sportsman's Group, Outdoor Channel and Sportsman's Channel. But I feel very strongly that all of us here, I mean, we contributed to a very substantial body of self-defense work. And that is available to you for free on My Outdoor TV. And you know what? At some point, you got to stop watching like Bosch over and over again. You know, there's something else you need to look at. So this week has been not much about the virus, but about our response to the virus. And so we're going into a week where the temperature is being turned up on the frog. So final thoughts for the week, Mr. Pincus, as we go forward into it. What are the people watching this, and there are a lot of them, what do they need to be thinking? What do they need to be focusing on? What do they need to be doing over the next 7 days?
I don't know if you can see it. I guess you can't from here. You're familiar with the city. I don't know who is. Is that showing up out there a little bit?
Yep.
So yep. I'm in Chelsea, which is kind of like the south edge of Midtown on the island of Manhattan. Down there behind those tall buildings right in front of me is the Freedom Tower and Ground Zero. And the first thing that I like to do when I have free time in the city, every time I come to the city with maybe one exception in the last 15 years or so, 20 years almost, I've gone down to Ground Zero and just kind of paid my respects and collected my thoughts and thought about the impact that 9/11 has had. And as I walk down 6th Avenue, you can see Freedom Tower from five feet that way. If my room was further away, you could see it. Well, I saw it the whole time. The Empire State Building's right over here. I spent a lot of time in this city. I have a lot of love for this city. And I'm walking down towards it. And as I'm walking down, I'm wearing a mask. A lot of people wearing masks. Like I said, it's very busy in this part of the city. And it's a long way down. But I walked all the way down. And as I was walking, I really was thinking about the irony of walking towards Freedom Tower. Because I did my 12 o'clock video today with Mark Walters on Armed American Radio from the Ground Zero site. So I was walking down there to do that. And I thought about the irony of walking towards Freedom Tower when I have friends and associates that can't open their businesses here, having to wear a mask, and all the restrictions that are happening in the state of New York and in the city of New York all the time. And it really more powerfully than ever before struck me about the last 20 years of talking about the people who lost their lives when freedom was attacked, when capitalism was attacked at the World Trade Center, and obviously the global war on terror and all the lives we've lost and all the impact that has happened over 20 years in America. And yet, here we are, not focusing on liberty and freedom. And I thought, millions of people have stood in the same place I was today and talked about never forgetting those lessons, never forgetting the value of freedom in our way of life, yet here we are. So I thought about, okay, wait a minute, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Which is the most important word in that clause? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it dawned on me that the most important word might be and. Because it's not life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness. It's not pick one and emphasize that only, which is what we're doing if we lock ourselves in our homes and never go out again until it's magically safe. And if we don't think about safety and life and living and surviving at all, and we just recklessly go in the pursuit of happiness, then that's not going to be a great result. That's not going to end well, right? Wouldn't it ended well during the AIDS crisis? It's not going to end well now. So we really have to balance those things. And it comes back to something I talked about a couple weeks ago, the idea of safety third. The first thing we have to do is live our lives. We have to have liberty. We have to be productive. We have to celebrate freedom and take advantage of it, and certainly pursue happiness while being responsible, while still surviving the baseline of life, right? So I think that was, for me, it was profound today walking down the street. And I guess that's what I would just ask everybody to really think about, is you're not picking and choosing here. You're trying to balance the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country and according to our ideals. So figure out how you're going to do that and take in information and make a decision. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you how to do it, because I don't think anybody knows. We're going to have to figure it out.
A very important point. As most of you know, when I lived in New York City, I had a loft across from the South Tower. My best friend lived there during 9/11 and asked me to come to New York as soon as the airplanes would fly, because he needed to go back into his loft to look for personal items, and he felt that he couldn't do it alone. So I did go to 9/11 when the fires were still burning, and certainly one of the most powerful experiences of my life. You want to understand what the cost of freedom is? I think if those that stood at 9/11 understand that, and it's because it was one of the most compelling moments of my life. It's why the moments we're in now scares the hell out of me. Mr. Janich, closing thoughts.
I don't know that I have anything more profound to share than what we've kind of summed up with in previous weeks, which again goes back to we all have to look at what is in our best interest. We need to think for ourselves. We need to get information that we feel is trustworthy. We need to analyze that information. We need to figure out how it applies to us and to our situations. As things start to open up, that same conceptual process continues to apply. We simply look at it now and say, okay, before I was hunkered down in my house, now I can go out and I can do more stuff. Well, don't just say, okay, it's over and forget it all and just go out and be reckless. What you need to do is to take the same thoughtful decision-making process that you've been applying so far and say, okay, as things open up, what places are doing a good job of this? What, if you see something that you think is a good idea or successful as far as the operation of a business or a procedure or a process, model that success, share that with other people, and really try to, as we try to achieve the new normal, try to empower other people by sharing good information. In many cases, that good information is something that you see or you experience firsthand. Because again, we're not going to get it from the powers that be.
Good. Dr. April.
I think we're all in the mind of thinking about 9/11 right now, and I think we run the risk, if we're not careful, of recapitulating one of the errors of 9/11, which was facing a challenge to the country to make sure that the solution to the challenge isn't worse than the challenge itself. Democracy's hard, liberty's hard. You got to want it bad, and that means you've got to be able to see through obvious mistakes and make sure that the outcome you're after yields the liberty that you're trying to protect.
Mr. Seeklander.
Man, well said. I don't have a lot to add. I would say be cautious. I think that some of these reopening stats that we say, hey, it doesn't look to be the end of the world again. I don't know if it's been long enough for us to tell. And also, to be honest with you, as we reopen, we are highly trained now probably not to touch things. We probably have gallons of sanitizer on our hands at most times. Most places are super clean. They're cleaning them 24 hours a day. So I don't know if some of those numbers are going to be really factual right away. But as we start to get lazy and lax, that's when we might start to see the incline again. And if so, remain calm. Let's not panic. I mean, listen to what the other three panelists and Mr. Bain said about freedom and liberty and pursuit of happiness. Hey, folks, that's really, really important stuff. And I'll close. I'm going to drive around the country for the next 2 weeks, and I'm going to hide these like Easter eggs. So for all you new gun owners, you don't get to not think. Okay, you don't get to take the gun you just bought this time, much like the AR you bought during the Obama administration, and put it somewhere up in the closet behind the clothes. Guess what? Get your thinking caps on, get your head out of your butt, join PDN, join my site, do whatever you want. Take responsibility for your firearms. Take responsibility for your own self-defense. It's called self-defense for a reason. It's up to you.
Once again, great comments, and thank you, Mike Seeklander, Mike Janich, Rob Pincus, Dr. William April, and I'm, of course, Michael Bain, and this is The Best Defense Survival. What I'd like to leave you with is I stayed in New York after 9/11. I was there for several weeks helping with my friend and doing some work. But on one particular day, it had been maybe 7-8 days since the attack. The city was filled with ash. It was everywhere. The city smelled, and you don't want to think about what it smelled like. But I'd broken for lunch, and I'd gone to a bodega, a deli, to grab a turkey sandwich. And standing in line in front of me was a goth girl, if you will, all in black, purple hair, lots of earrings, metal in the face, everything like that. And she's standing there, and a news hawker walked by with the newest edition of the newspaper, and the headline was "Anthrax Nation," because that was during the anthrax threats. And she looked at it and looked at the newspaper, and she broke down sobbing, just broke down. Just huge waves of tears, and she's crying, and she looks at me, and she goes, "We're all going to die, aren't we?" And I sort of took her hands and said, "Well, yes. I can assure you we're all going to die, but I'm pretty sure we're not all going to die until I get my turkey sandwich. And she goes, well, that's hopeful. I said, yeah, that's hopeful. So if I could give you with any thought, it's to be hopeful and to be willing to defend your rights and to be willing to do smart things. This is The Best Defense Survival, and we will see you next week.